but I think it gives me an advantage that I totally lose when I'm sitting behind a computer. In terms of having a partner, I think that having a partner is a bigger advantage on online than in person, because in person I hear the auction name. I hear the name, and right away I do my thing. Ruvain does his thing. If you're one person online, you've got to look at the draft board, then you look at your software, then go back and forth. It gives you only one set of eyes and hands. I'd much rather do it with two online. So I think it's a bigger advantage for that reason, having the partner, but it's less of an advantage in terms of how to bid and price marketing. Is that fair, Derek, you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm a multi-screen person all the time. There's never a time when I'm working or drafting where I don't have at least the two screens going simultaneously. But I'm trying to think if there's anything I pick up on online. Sometimes the cadence of someone's bidding. I think if you see someone waiting until the going once, going twice to jump in, they're maybe not sure, or they're trying to be kind of coy. If you see someone going back and forth, player starts at 8, and it's going 9, 10, 11, 12, it's just real quick. I think to me that's a sign that someone usually wants a player, and it's a really weird way to show that you want a player when you could just jump the player up. And I think it's actually harder to read a jump bid than it is to read someone bidding quickly, but that's just my opinion. But yeah, I mean, I think online especially, so if you're auctioning online in tandem, you could be in the same room if you wanted to be, or you could just be on Skype or Zoom or whatever, and you could actually talk. Like if you're sitting next to each other at an auction table, you really can't talk about what you want to do with the other people in the league sitting right next to you, but you can openly talk about what you're doing as it's happening if you're auctioning online in a tandem.
1,000%. And you're right about the noticing how they bid. I was in Tout Wars last year, and I noticed that whenever Alex Chamberlain wanted somebody, he was the first person, click, right there. And then he didn't bid, then he didn't bid, and then he came on in the end. So we were able to price enforce. I bid up Alex Chamberlain because I knew he wanted that player. So, you want Nelson? I'm just going to bid another $1. You put up Aaron Judge? I'm going to bid another $1. I know you're going to go the extra $1 there. So that's something I noticed. I'm now before we talk about a little bit about the bidding and the nominating and whatnot, a little bit about studying other players. As you might know, I think you devoted about 15 minutes on the Athletic Show this year to how I rated and reviewed Ian Kahn and others from my league. I am a very big prep on knowing the players, because I think that there's an advantage in knowing what they're going to do, because I'm going to alter my plan. If I know that a certain player wants a certain owner wants a certain player, I'm not going to get them. I'm going to plan around them. If I know somebody plays in the $15 pitcher space and buys up all of them, I probably won't be able to play as much. I might have to tilt off of that. I'll notice very quickly what somebody is nominating of, very quickly what they want, what they don't want. I like to zone in on that on scout players very, very much. Go to Ruvain first. What do you feel about that? Do you agree with that? Do you do any of that on your own?
I really don't. I mean, you do it a lot more than I do. I mean, we were watching some of these auctions in Florida last year. I wasn't really looking at how they were bidding. I wasn't looking at how it was going. I was watching the big board, watching how certain positions were going, how steals were going, how home runs were going, and I was watching that. Scouting the player, it really helps more if you're in a home league, but it's a lot harder if you're in an NFBC and you don't know the people. Now, granted, we're in an NFBC league that we've been doing for years. It's a Friday morning league. We know these players. We actually know how they play. Is that an advantage? Not really, because they know how we play also. So, it goes both ways. It's not either way, but it's better to know and watch the big board, I think, as opposed to actually scouting the players.
Yeah, Derek, do you scout people, or do you rely your plan on what other tendencies are?
I guess I would say I'm paying attention to what other people are doing to some extent. I'm not going to completely overlook that in NL Labor, for example, Derek Carty only drafts pitchers in the reserve rounds, right? So if I'm making a reserve pick and I'm thinking about a pitcher versus a hitter, I know that if I let the pitcher go, there's a good chance that in Derek's 2 turns before my next one, that pitcher is more likely to be gone, right? So little things like that. I mean, I am trying to pick up on patterns of like the one you described with Alex, where if someone is in early and then swooping back in late, that's a pretty good tell that they're into that player. But I think it's helpful to understand the tendencies and desires of the people you're playing against. It can be a slippery slope. I think you can almost become too fixated on what everybody else is trying to do, and then you start to miss out on opportunities to give yourself the best possible roster. So I do think it's an important balance to strike. You want to know as much as you can about the competition, but you don't want it to start costing you quality players because you're reading too much into something else that's happening at the table.
Yeah, no doubt. And I do that as a poker player, especially. Poker is quite a bit psychology and quite a bit reading people. So maybe it's my poker tendencies in me that allows me to do that more than other people, and it doesn't take away from anything else I'm doing at the draft. I just noticed that I do that, and I noticed that I extract value because of it. I mean, I wouldn't do it unless I thought it would be helpful. Want to talk about nominations and nominating players. I think this is one of the things in auctions that people do. I'm not going to say overlook. I think they do it wrong. I really believe that people do not know how to nominate players, and that's one of my advantage, one of our advantages, Ruven and I, that we do things a little bit better than others. And what I mean by that is I've seen this strategy where just nominate players you don't want in the very beginning. I think that's such a lousy strategy. I think that if you're just doing that, you're losing information. Like, you have the ability to extract information about maybe what path your plan is, what path decision tree your team wants to go in. You might have to know what to do about a certain player. So even though he's a guy that you like, you might have to bid him first. And there's different parts in the draft. I mean, if I have a lot of money at a certain point in the draft, and I have more than the average, I don't want to be in that position. I'd rather be as close to the average as possible. Then I'll nominate players I don't want. Or if I picked a very expensive first baseman right before, my next nomination is that first baseman, unless I need to know information about somebody else. How do you nominate players, and what are you thinking of for that?
Well, I think you have to have a purpose for every nomination, and there could be a lot of different reasons you would choose to nominate one player versus the other. I mean, if we're early on in an auction and let's say everything's coming up +4, +5, +6, right? People are overspending values, even adjusted values, by a healthy margin. At that point, I'm probably going to throw a player I don't really want to buy. An expensive player, of course, because people are overpaying in my estimation. So, in that situation, I'm just making sure that someone else is getting a player that I don't really want at a price that I would love for them to pay. In an instance where prices are pretty fair, I might actually go ahead and nominate a player I want because the room tends to price players off of other similar players that were recently sold, right? So that's a really important part to think about early. Like, what's happening in the room? If you don't like prices and you want to go back to a group of players later, I think throwing the room to a totally different type of player is one way to do that. So if your nomination comes up and we're talking about elite hitters going for 40 plus, and you're like, wow, I want to get an elite hitter, but I want to pay 35 instead. Great. Nominate a closer. Do something completely different. Throw a prospect. Do something that gets the room away from the pattern of buying $40 players. I think there's other times where, if you're not sure what to do and you want to just basically call a timeout, throw a player that's going to go for a lot of money and start the bidding a lot lower than you ordinarily would, and just catch your breath for a minute if you're not going to get that player, right? I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you can take advantage of actually nominating a player, and I think you're right. I think there are some people that just say, "Oh, it's my turn. I'll just throw whatever," and I think that's an opportunity lost.
Yeah, Ruven, well, when we do auctions, I'm doing the number crunching, and you're doing the who would we nominate next, because we think it's so important. So maybe you can tell everybody some of the tactics that we use in what we do during the auction for a nomination.
Yeah, well, first of all, one thing we do is in the very beginning of the draft, we want to throw someone out that we want, someone that we want to test the market for. Like, let's say, hypothetically, we want a corner infielder. We want a high-priced corner infielder just to get the base stats. Let's say we want Freddie Freeman. We'll nominate Freddie Freeman just to see how the market reacts to him. We want to see how things go. Even if he's the first, listen, you can have the first pick. You could throw out Freddie Freeman first. That you may get a bargain on that because people may want to spend money elsewhere. So you may actually get a bargain on that. So we want to test the waters and see how the room, just see what the room is like. That's number one. Number two, do not only nominate players that you want. Switch it up a little bit. Otherwise, other players in the room, it's going to be a tell. You want a guy, you're going to nominate him. People are going to say, okay, you know what? We know what this person's going after him. We know exactly what to do. Number 3, if you draft and you get JT Realmuto, don't nominate every single catcher. It does not help you. They're going to get nominated anyway. You're better off nominating something that you want to see how the market is, as opposed to nominating another catcher, because you don't need that catcher. Yes, there's room on your roster for it, and these other players are not going to overspend on Wilson Ramos just because you nominate him in the 5th or 6th round. It just doesn't work that way. You don't get anything out of it.
Of course, you're telling everybody we're going to nominate the player we want. Of course, we will indeed switch that up this year so that anybody listening playing in our drafts will not be able to ascertain what we're doing. But there's a lot of right. There's a lot of other there are a lot of other tidbits and tricks. Like one thing that we came up with last year was the Joey Votto nomination. Joey Votto we had maybe worth $6 on our auction prices. But, if he's the kind of guy that might, at the very end, somebody will be lucky enough to get for $1. Now, I'll be happy to get Joey Votto for $1. Didn't really want to buy him for $3, which would have been a bargain, but I probably wanted a different entity or somewhere else. So in order to collapse the return on investment for others, somewhere in the middle of the auction, Joey Votto $1. That ensures either I get that ridiculous 1-to-6 ratio, or he'll probably be bid up to 3 or 4, and it collapses somebody's profit potential 100%. So that's another thing. You want to get some of those really guys who you don't really want, but your numbers say it's worth it, and you're happy to take for one. Get some of those out as well. What are some examples of that? Yasiel Puig was a guy last year we did that with. Now, the other thing about auction is that you don't have to nominate players in order. You might want to nominate players to acquire certain statistics in the middle. I think last year one of our plans was, and it didn't work because Elvis Andrus did not steal many bases last year, and he was injured for some of it. But we saw that Elvis Andrus, according to our values, was a nice $7 bargain or whatever it was, and we threw him out pretty early on because we wanted to bank up the speed at where we thought we can get him cheaply, and then go for power later on. So you can do that. Feel free in nominating a guy who thinks only worth $7 if you think it's going to help your overall roster construction. A lot of tidbits like that. Any other ones to add, Derek?
No, I just think the main takeaway, if you didn't listen to anything I said at the first part of that answer, have a reason for nominating the player that you nominate.
Right. Information is key, and do that. Now, the other thing that I do want to tell people is it's something we call the economic box. If you want a certain player in a certain category, if you want one of the next 3 starting pitchers, don't nominate a guy above a player and below a player so that the only guy who's available anywhere close to that is the player you want. If there's only one pitcher in a tier left, that pitcher is going to go for more value than it should, right? If you have a jewelry store and you see a nice shiny pendant in a box somewhere up, it looks like it's worth more value than it is. People will pay up. You want to nominate the players before they are the last person in the tier. If there's a guy that you want and that's there's 2 players above, nominate your guy first so that he won't get inflated by economic pressures of the market, right? If he's the last player in the tier, you're just going to get an automatic extra $1 or $2 because it's supply and demand. If there's no more supply, his price goes up. So that's nominate guys. Don't let guys in a box. And conversely, if you don't want a player, let's say there are 2 guys in a tier and you don't want the top player or the second player, don't nominate the top one if you want to get rid of a player. Nominate the second one or third one. Slice up the tier. The more you slice up the board to generate these boxes of players where they're all out alone, up top and shiny, the more you'll extract value from the rest of the field. People will overbid if they perceive that I got to get them. The supply is limited. So slice up tiers when you don't, and don't let it get into the box. Nominate your guys first. So good stuff there. Talk a little about bidding. You have to throw a number out first. Do you have any general rule, Derek, as to what you're throwing out first?
I don't have at least I don't have a firm rule. I think I tend to go half or 2/3, sometimes even 3/4 of what I'm willing to spend.